Good afternoon and welcome to another FSR debate. Today we are navigating the path towards EU climate neutrality, and we will focus on a recent report published by the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change. We are very lucky to have one of the authors with us today. And Ilaria Conti, my co-host, will very soon introduce the topic. Before passing the screen to her, let me just remind the audience that you're more than welcome to ask questions. Please use the Q&A facility on the platform and try to avoid the chat. We would like to avoid having two events going on in the same place. So without further ado, let me pass the screen to Ilaria to introduce the debate today.
Many thanks, Alberto, and welcome everybody. Indeed, today we are going to discuss about climate and climate neutrality. Particularly, we wanted to devote this debate to this very important publication, this recent report by the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change. It's titled Towards EU Climate Neutrality, Progress, Policy Gaps and Opportunities, and it was published in January this year. So very recent, very timely debate. As we know, the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change was established under the EU climate law. The EU climate law that we all remember because it was a very important milestone in legislative process. It was adopted in June 2021, and it is the law that sets climate neutrality in the EU by 2050 as a binding objective. So something very innovative, even from many perspectives, and of course extremely important to reach the objectives that Europe has in terms of fighting against the climate change. Together with the climate law, which really aims at monitoring progress towards the achievements of these objectives, we have the establishment of this important group, which is made by 15 members, composed by 15 members, and provides advice to the European institutions. So not only the Commission, also the Parliament, the Council, and so on. As you said, Alberto, we are very pleased to have today one member of this important group. It's Lina Kitzing, who is here with us today. Lina is head of the Division for Wind Energy Systems at DTU at the Danish Technical University, but she's also a part-time professor with us at FSR since September last year. So very welcome, Lina, and thanks for being with us. We will start with her presentation. She will present the report, or the main important provisions and findings of the report, particularly focused on energy, of course. And then we will have another main presentation by the European Commission. We have the pleasure of having DG Clima here with us today. We have Stefano Santacroce and Alban Kitus. Alban Kitus is Deputy Head of Unit for Climate Policy, and Stefano Santacroce is Economic Analyst. Thank you very much to both for being with us today. This is for the first part of the debate. Then Alberto will take over and we will have a very interesting debate with the other panelists that he will introduce later on. So now, without further ado, I really look forward to hearing from Lina and from our colleagues in DG Clima. Lina, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ilaria, and it's my pleasure to be here and to be able to present a report. And what you have not mentioned is that, of course, we have been writing this report and been through all the different climate and energy policies in Europe. We've done that for the first time. And we ended up writing a report that was more than 300 pages. So I will not be able to talk about all of that today, but I'm sure that you've all read the whole report. So we can just pick some of the maybe more interesting things that we can discuss on. So let's see. I hope that you can see my screen all right now. Yeah?
Yep, perfect.
Yes.
Good. So what I've decided to do is I will tell you a little bit about what we've looked at, then our recommendations on a very high level, and then I will deep dive a little bit into the energy sector, because that's my area of expertise, and then we can start talking about also the other areas. So Ilaria already mentioned our board. Just as a reminder, that's us. We are 15 scientists from different disciplines working with climate, energy, agriculture in Europe. And when the board was established, you can also see it's very diverse. There's maximum 2 members from each member state in Europe as well. And we are the board. We are the authors of the reports that we are doing, and then we also have a secretariat which sits in Copenhagen, and there's also around 15 people in the secretariat who support the board in their work, in our work. So regarding this context, we have published this report in an intersection between different policy cycles that are ongoing in Europe. So the first one is the implementation of the 2030 policy framework, where we are in the implementation phase at the moment, and we have looked into the target compliance, you can say, for the 2030 framework. But we've also had quite a big focus on the 2050 framework, so towards climate neutrality, and the 2040 discussion that's going on. And our biggest report so far from the Climate Advisory Board was the advice in June last year, where we have recommended, this is the one that's a little bit grayed out here on the slide, where we have recommended our view, or we have given our view on what the 2040 target should be for climate CO2 emissions, and also for a carbon budget 2030 to 50. And this is also something that's in the debate right now. And this new report here that came out in January fits into both of these cycles, because we look both into the 30 and the 2050 framework. And let me see. Yes, so what do we do? Internally, we have always called the report our gaps report, because we looked into what are the gaps in the policy, but it's actually more than that. We looked into policy consistency and opportunities for reaching climate neutrality in Europe in 2050. So what we did is we identified needs. So what needs to happen for the EU to remain on track on the climate targets, and then we looked into the gaps. So the gaps in the current policy framework that, in our view, hinders progress towards these needs. And we have looked into several different gaps. So first, policy gap, when there is no EU policy in place to address a need that we had identified. Then an ambition gap, where there is a policy in place, but then lacks some ambition so that we can be confident that it meets the needs. Implementation gap, where there is ambitious policy in place, but there are either poorly implemented or not quite there where they need to be. And then we also identified policy inconsistencies, where there are several different EU policies that are counterproductive or counteracting each other. So this is all the different areas that we went through, in some areas in more detail than in others. Yes, and then based on that analysis, we give recommendations, scientific advice based on scientific research. The Climate Advisory Board itself does not do research in this work, but we base all our recommendations on existing scientific research. So we focused. So this was the approach. Sequentially, the areas that we looked at is both different sectors. So that you can see here in the greenish part. So we split out into the energy supply, industry, transport, buildings, agriculture, and carbon sinks. And then looked, of course, towards climate neutrality. We looked into 80 different indicators in these different sectors, how they're going based on the needs that we have identified. And we compared that to what's going on at the moment, what is needed. And for that, we actually built very much on our 2040 advice, because there we made a large analysis looking through a lot of different carbon neutrality pathways and scenarios. So we could build a lot on that work, and then also on different other scenarios also coming from the the European Commission themselves. But then also we looked into cross-cutting enabling conditions. So how do we get to these changes in the different sectors? Price schemes, pricing emissions, then some more high-level things around the just transition, public engagement. Of course, this is very important when we look into these transitions that are happening, financing, investment, innovation, governance, and then also skills and capacity building. So we have separate chapters in the report on all of these because we think that this is necessary to reach climate neutrality overall. Right, and then we identified these recommendations, and here we split them into several different quadrants, you can say. So what needs to be done right now to reach the 2030 targets? What needs to be done right now to reach 2050, to keep on track towards 2050? And then what needs to be done later to keep on track to 2050? So in each of these, we have 4 or 5 recommendations. And here they are. So short term, towards 2030, we make recommendations around implementing Fit for 55 fully and swiftly. There's still things missing. The Energy Taxation Directive is an important area that still needs work on. European Green Deal needs to be implemented and revised. So stable investment outlook for renewables. We see that based on the needs. I will also get a little bit into that later on. And then phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, very urgent need. Then regarding the pathway towards climate neutrality, aligning EU policies with the phase out of fossil fuels, we don't see that believably at the moment, so that especially in electricity heat generation, the virtual, literal phase out of fossil fuels can be achieved by 2040 with the current policies. Addressing socioeconomic impacts of these climate policies, very important. Agriculture. There's still a lot to be done regarding agricultural policy, and the target deployment of carbon capture and utilization. So this is also something that we are currently working on further, carbon removals, and will publish a separate report on that. Yeah, and then the investment climate. Everybody knows that we have to, significantly increase investments for climate solutions. I think we write in the report 4 times as much as we're currently doing. And then on the longer term, strengthening governance and compliance frameworks, revising the EU emission trading system to make it fit for net zero. There is currently a lot of open questions regarding what happens when we are reaching zero caps, and energy material demand. Things are not going in the right way at the moment regarding recyclability, circular economy, and also general material demands that we are using in Europe. And then the emission pricing schemes need expanding for other sectors. That's our recommendation, especially in the agriculture sector and the carbon sink, so that carbon removals can be incentivized. So that was a little bit high level on the recommendations. If you want to dig deeper in any of them, you can read more in the report. I also have a summary slide, but I will go a bit more into detail with the energy side now. So overall, I think this is actually a combination picture from our 2040 report and what's been happening in Europe. This is not energy. This is a complete CO2 emission still. So overall, we can see, well, everybody knows how emissions have been going until now. This is the solid line, and we know we need to get into net zero. There's a -55 target for 2030 that's been agreed upon, and then our recommendation -90, so 95% in greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. So you can see this is quite a steep decline in CO2 emissions that we need to reach in Europe if we want to follow this carbon reduction path towards climate neutrality. And the stippled line you can see here is what we have identified on the projections with the measures planned at national level. So there is still a long way to go in terms of policies so that we can actually go and reach the net zero. On the 2030, you can see there is a very small gap, but it grows larger and larger, especially for 40 and 50. And also, if you look into the annual CO2 reductions, a lot has been achieved in the past, 61 megatons on average per year, but this needs to be much more much faster in the coming years, until 2030, and then even faster after that. So there is a lot to be done in terms of reductions. Right. So how do we do that? We know that energy is, of course, still the largest emitter of CO2 in Europe. And now, yes. So you can see that here. So this is from our analysis. We started looking into the indicators and what is going on. And here, this is energy, primary and final energy consumption. And you can see here in the energy consumption, a lot, half is still on oil products and fossil gases, right? And when we go to 2050, you can see here is we're going from this light blue, from the bluish colors to a greenish color, which is electricity, right? So here we are actually having a big switch that needs to be done. So most of the final energy consumption will be based on electricity in the future. So you can see that that switch that is necessary. It's just as an example of how we went about. And then here you can see an overview over the progress in energy supply. It's a table that I really like. So what we did here is we went through. So this is regarding the needs and the progress towards those needs. We did that for all the different sectors. So this is just the example for energy here. We identified different indicators, for example, overall greenhouse gas emissions, electricity generation mix, electricity greenhouse gas emission intensity, capacity deployment of renewables. And we identified these needs that you can see here. There's a reference period and a historical process, and what is required until now in terms of change. We identified that from our scenarios, from the carbon neutrality pathways. And then we checked if we are on track, if we are almost on track, somewhat off track, considerably off track, or if even the development goes into the wrong direction. And I can tell you that for energy, the table is the least red. Yes, so it's one of the best workings. And especially here, you can see on the greenhouse gas emission side, we have had an average reduction of greenhouse gas emissions of 65 megatons CO2 per year, which is actually more than what is identified in our as a need in our scenario. So we are actually very much on track on the greenhouse gas emissions. When we look into the electricity intensity, greenhouse gas intensity, it's a little bit different picture, right? So overall emissions go down, but in the electricity, the intensity of the electricity system is actually, we need a faster reduction than what we have seen in the past. I will go through. I have a few slides on the electrification and the wind and solar additions as well, that we can have a look at. I think that's maybe easier to look. So first, yeah, you can see here. This is the overall CO2 emissions in the energy supply, where I said we are on a very good track. We just need to go down further. And here you can see electrification rate. So we have looked into electrification rate in the past. It has been completely flat. And when we go into and look into the carbon neutrality scenarios, the pathways, what is realistic, so you can see the greenish square. This is our target advice from our own scenarios in the 2040 advice. We need a very much higher electrification in order to be able to reach the carbon neutrality. And then there's also some other benchmarks you can see from some other statistics, European Commission itself scenarios. So no matter where you are looking, most of these things, so electrification needs to go up significantly, and we have not really achieved that until now. And then similar for annual additions in PV capacity, you can see the history. Then you can see the mix in some of the Commission scenarios, and then our estimations required. And then you see the blue little dots. That's what the industry is thinking. We also found that quite interesting, right? So that it's actually quite ambitious going up. But here again, gigawatts added per year in solar capacity. We see a huge need for increase here, and policy needs to support that. And then you can see that for wind as well, onshore and offshore. Onshore wind in the scenarios that we have looked into the different pathways. I have to maybe mention that we did not do these scenarios on our own. We asked the scientific community to submit scenarios to us, and they actually did over 1,000 scenarios, of which we analyzed some, and we took I think around 35 that we analyzed in more detail. So it's kind of a combination of the overall picture of the scientific community in Europe, where the range signifies the different scenarios of the ones that we found feasible. And you can see here that this is it needs quite a significant increase of annual capacity additions in 2030. And after 2030, we are maybe pretty much around what we still need, but we cannot slow down in any case. And the offshore as well, there is it's maybe a little bit less ambitious in our scenarios, but increases needed as well, as compared to the historic, as you can see. And this is also, I mean, the purple in between our estimations and the history this is coming from the Fit for 55. So there is already quite an ambitious increase there. Okay, so these were some of the indicators that we looked into. And here, so on the energy side, and here is just a very, very broad wrap up of the other sectors. So you can here see also again here historic emissions. The energy supply is of course the largest contributor to CO2 emissions in Europe. Then, but also the industry, transport is a big contributor, buildings and agriculture. And what you can also see is that the land sinks, so the LULUCF, actually decreasing CO2 sinks, which is a little bit worrying. And we're seeing a lot of reliance on these land sinks as well in a lot of scenarios, where that also needs to be backed up by policies. So regarding industrial greenhouse gas emissions have already reduced by 30% in the past years between 2005 and 22, but this was mostly driven by lower production in some of the energy-intensive industries, and not so much by actual transformation of the sector. What we are seeing, so that needs to be there needs to be a structural change in there. Then on the transport side, the reduction path, we did a similar analysis that as for the energy, as I said before, the reduction path of the greenhouse gas emissions in transport sector needs to double, right? So we need to be twice as fast in greenhouse gas reductions as we have been. The problem with transport is that currently there is an overall growth in transport demand. So there is an offsetting effect there. And we come to the conclusion that there needs to be a shift towards lower emission transport modes. And this is also something that we are not really seeing at the moment. And the switch to electric vehicles needs to also accelerate quite a lot. I have no numbers on that in here. Then on the building sector, we see the trend not aligned with the EU climate objectives, especially on the efficiency side. We are not exactly following the trend there. Needs to be accelerated. Zero emission buildings and retrofits of existing buildings. I think we write enough in there. And then on the agriculture side, of course, this is not my own area of expertise, but we have seen very little progress on agriculture emissions in Europe. And you can see here is not the largest emitting sector, but once we have decarbonize the energy supply and the transport sector, this is a large remaining share. So
thank you, Lina. We are a little bit over time, so if I could invite you to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. So I think I will just go back to that. Sorry. Yeah, to that last slide again. So here is the overview of our slides again, or our recommendations again, right? So implementing the Fit for 55, especially also on national level. So we have a lot of EU legislation. Some of it still needs to be finalized, but also on the national level. Adopting some of the pending legislation and these stable investment outlooks I've shown now for renewable energy. We need to accelerate the investment quite a lot. It's not happening. And then we need to have that transformational shift in the supply, which needs to be backed up by a phase out of fossil fuel subsidies as well. And then, regarding the other areas, I think I will leave it at here, and we can maybe have it in the discussion as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Many thanks, Lina. Really, really interesting input. And actually, this is the basis for the discussion of our debate. So thanks very much for being so exhaustive. I'm sure that this has stimulated already some questions and insights. So we can move to the next presentation from the DG Climate Department of the European Commission, our colleagues Stefano Santacroce and Alban Kitus, please.
Thank you, Ilaria. Let me know if you can see the presentation correctly. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting us to this very interesting exchange of views. And secondly, I would like to say that here in the Commission, particularly in DG Clima, we welcomed the report from ESABCC. I think we will need more of this kind of an analysis in the next years when we approach the deadline for the different targets. And I think it sets the tone of what an assessment of progress should be done, and very detailed on different sectors with proposal. So we very welcome. I think this debate it's already very rich. I don't want to subtract time for the conversation, so I try to be very fast on the. It's not easy to see. Okay, on my slides. The first part of the presentation, it's a bit about what we have done in the last 4 or 5 years.
Stefano, sorry for interrupting. We see some sort of black boxes on your, and I'm not sure if you are able to remove them because they impede. Ah, voila, they already reduced them. If you can also move them, it's perfect.
Okay, move that.
Well done.
Okay.
Very good.
It was actually was you and the other participants.
Very
Which
good.
helped me to speak, because it's not easy to speak in front of Ursula von der Leyen. So at least I was looking
We can
at
understand.
you and the other. So I move next, but I mean, what the Commission, together with the Parliament and the Member States, have done on climate action in the last 4 years, I think it's quite impressive. Since the launch of the European Green Deal, which is our compass to navigate this journey, we've seen several legislative initiative that continues since last week in different sectors and in all the domain and the area. So I think it's quite impressive, quite unprecedented, I would say. So at the heart of the European Green Deal is the objective to become climate neutral by 2050. And this was an objective that member states, the European Parliament, and the Commission have subscribed unanimously, I would say. Among the first elements of the Green Deal, the EU climate law that Lina cited before, entered into force in July 21 and made binding the climate neutrality commitment. And it also included a target to reduce at least 55% by 2030 our net emission compared to the 1990 levels. But the European Green Deal is not is about more than setting targets. It's also about creating the right enabling environment, and in particular to put people at the center of this on this transition. Okay, this I will skip. What we have done, and I also like to recall this, is in order to deliver the target in the European Green Deal and the climate law, we proposed this legislative package called the Fit for 55. As you can see, it's touched upon all the sectors involved in the economy, and in quite very fast manner, we conclude all the legislative process, and we are adding pieces to touch other aspects. Lina before mentioned the carbon removal. I just recall that together to the communication to the 2040 target was also this communication on the carbon management. 2 days ago, there was the communication on climate risk, quite novelty. So just to give you the flavor of what is here, the kind of work we are doing, and so on. But let's move to what kind of progress we have achieved and the challenges ahead. This graph coming from the Climate Action Progress Report 2023, which we published in October last year, and it's very similar to the one that Lina showed before. So first of all, based on provisional data, net GHG emission decreased by around 3% in 2022. As you see from the graph, this comes after the fall in 2020 due to COVID, and then followed by the strong rebound in 2021. So we could say that we are broadly back in a descending trend to the 2030 target. The reduction is close to 32% compared to 1990. But as we said before, we need absolutely to accelerate the speed of the reduction to stay on track to achieve our target. We say almost triple. Some preliminary indication for 2023 for example, looking at the quarterly emission statistic from Eurostat estimate, I would say, probably the 2023, we will see another significant reduction of emission, but let's see what's happening. Then the challenge by sectors. I think this graph matches what Lina has just shown. You see in dark blue the reduction in emission between 1990 and 2022. In light blue, the expected emission from now to 2030, and then in the yellow bar, in the next decade, to achieve the estimated emission reduction by sectors. You can see immediately where the challenges are relative to past mitigation. It's clear that the sector of buildings and transport have to do quite a lot in terms of reduction, particular transport, that emission has increased so far compared to 1990. So it would be quite a significant challenge. We mentioned also LULUCF, because although the additional effort relative to what they have done seem to be easy, the last 5 years we have seen a decrease of the sink, so it's important. And similar for agriculture, because despite the dark blue bar indicate that since 1990 there was significant reduction, when we look at the last 7 years, I think, you see a quite flat. So there's quite thing to do. Just on a positive side, I would say that all those framework that I showed you before on the Fit for 55, and all the regulations and directive that we have strengthened in the last years, as still to be materialized in terms of emissions. So what we expect that once those initiatives will be fully implemented and we start to see the effect, probably this kind of acceleration will be visible also on our data. So what happened now after 2020, but 2030, but I would say also between now and 2030. I think one thing is not stressed enough in those slides is the implementation and the monitoring. So what we have done so far, that we have set those targets, and at the same time we are also improving the way we are assessing the progress. I just mentioned that the preparation of the energy and climate plans, the NCP, as we say, as acronym, it's something that it's an important change in the governance framework, and we are also improve the effects. In fact, in March 2023, for the first time, member states have to report progress under this NCP using an e-platform. These allow, for example, to get immediately information from member states and try to analyze those information, in particular on policy measures, and to see what member states are doing and provide recommendation on which sector to improve their actions and so on. So above this, we are also reviewing our governance structure. So all the recommendations that are, for example, in these reports are very welcome for the future. But under the European climate law, the EU is also required to take steps and to indicate a new target for 2040. So the Commission conducted public consultation last year, And in February this year, we published our recommendation, so the 2040 climate target. It's very difficult to summarize in few slides the communication. And so I really invite you to take time to read the communication and the impact assessment that is underpin the communication. I put the link at the end of this presentation, so you can, if you have not done yet, you can do it. But I will try to just focus on the main things. First of all, the objective of the communication is to launch a public debate to inform the preparation of this post-2030 framework. It does not propose currently any new policy measures or set new sector-specific targets. So in a nutshell, the communication is the start of a dialogue and an extensive outreach with citizens, business, stakeholders, social partners, NGOs, and this has already started. So as you know already, the communication presents a 90% net GHG emission reduction compared to 1990 level as a recommended target for 2040. This would ensure that the corresponding overall GHG emission budget for the EU between now and 2050 is in line with the provision of the European climate law. I will not go to the specific of different scenario we took on board, but I think maybe we have time after to do this. So as I say, this is backed by a detailed analysis that illustrates the pathway to 2040 and 2050, and really I invite you to have a look to the impact assessment. Now, what is important to highlight is that achieving the target require a set of enabling conditions. First, a full implementation of the agreed 2030 framework to ensure the competitiveness of the European industry, a greater focus on just transitions and a level playing field with international partners, and an open dialogue that I mentioned. Why is this important? In particular, I'll stress the first point, the full implementation of the 2030 agreed framework, because just extrapolating the existing legislation and measures will deliver in 2040 something around 80% of emission cuts. So it's very important that we continue to work on fully implement this the Fit for 55 and all the 2030 framework.
Okay.
Another point that I want to stress,
Stefano, please, if you could wrap up, because we are again
last
sentence.
The last point is the dialogue. So what we want to stress here is that the dialogue that would start already, will be around the 6 point that we show below. So first of all, an economy that delivers for people, that has an effect to people, a focus on the energy system, which remain crucial. We mentioned electrification before, and another point is the industrial decarbonization deal. So our competitiveness, the competitiveness of our industry at the core, need to be at the core. And then, of course, transport, improving mobility, land, food, and bioeconomy, and then the investment agenda. So our idea is that this dialogue will be around these 6 core items, and we will develop on on this dialogue, our future policy framework. Sorry, I've been a bit confusing, jumping here and there, but
Not at all.
open to question if there are.
Not at all. Thanks. Thanks a lot, Stefano. Yes, again, we'll have some time for questions from the audience in case something isn't clear. But thank you very much. This was, again, another interesting presentation. And thanks also for the invite to the dialogue. Alberto, the floor is yours for the second part of the debate.
Thank you, Laria. Thank you for the opening presentations. Yes, indeed, we have now a panel. We will run some polls afterwards involving all the audience. But first, we're lucky to have three experts providing views from different constituencies. We have a colleague of ours from the FSR, Albert Ferrari, research associate in our climate area. Then we have Sven Harmeling. He's head of climate at Climate Action Network Europe, so the view of the environmental NGOs. And then Paul Wilczek, he's head of energy policy, climate and sustainability of Eurelectric, so the view of the electricity sector. So I would invite each of you for an initial statement. Please stay within 5 minutes. Then we will run the polls, and then there will be an opportunity for commenting on the results of the polls and also to take some of the questions from the audience. We already have a couple, but I would invite the audience again to, if they have questions, to put them in the Q&A facility. So Albert, you want to start?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Alberto, for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Elena, for this presentation of this dense report, and DG Climate Action for taking part in this event. Yeah, it was really useful to look at the report, to have this overview of the progress made of the European Commission. Looking at the presentation of Lena, I think my presentation will mostly focus on the cross-cutting enabling conditions that were discussed and presented in the report. In terms of momentum, I think it's really important to have this discussion now, not only because of the adoption of the global stock date at the last COP, but also because with the European election, we are planning the year ahead. And as reminded by the IPCC, it's really important to take action in the next few years. As this was seen in the previous presentation, I think if we look at the sectors of building, transport, and agriculture, it represents today around 43% of the EU emissions, and it's really something that needs to be tackled. The Fit for 55 with the EU ETS2 that covers road transport and building, as well as other measures of the Fit for 55, they're really a great step in the right direction. But these are sectors, as we have seen in the recent protests, that are rather difficult to regulate, because in a way they affect more directly households and specific parts of the population. So yeah, I think it's really important to consider really between the clean energy package, the Fit for 55, to consider the full implementation of the measures that are already in place, and in particular close the adoption of the proposals of the Fit for 55. I've looked at it today, and yeah, there's still a few proposals that are not yet adopted. In particular, I think the Energy Taxation Directive would be instrumental, not only in reducing the emission of the transport, but also the agricultural sector. And yeah, when we look at this report, what we really see is that climate policies really need to go beyond the sectorial approaches. And as suggested by the advisory board, we really need to look at the entire decision-making process and make sure it's fit for net zero in terms of governance, in terms of how we design policies, in terms of what are the socio-economic impact of climate policies, but also what are the climate implications of other social and economic policies. For me, I really take that, yeah, citizen consumers, they really should be an integral part of the future climate policies. We've seen in our recent studies in the project Life Cause that a lot of literature looks at, recent literature looks at how to make policies more acceptable, and really need to put an effort in how we design them and how we communicate these policies. For instance, carbon prices is one thing, but also looking and communicating about what we do about these revenues is really something that can be instrumental in facilitating acceptability. It can tackle distributional impact, decarbonizing the economy. And yeah, one other aspect is also to consider not only the actual impact, but also the perceived impact of climate policies. Something that when we see it in the agricultural sector, climate policies are sometimes a target, but in fact, there's not, although the PAC is going in that direction, the CAP, Common Agricultural Policy, is going in that direction, there is not much done. So yeah, when we talk about extending also carbon prices, I think the aspect of just transition should really be broader in terms of not only now focusing on energy in the industry as we've been doing, but also looking at agriculture and transport. And for that, maybe the energy sector could be an interesting example to look at, how citizens and consumers can be more instrumental, as how demand, for example, demand flexibility, energy communities, how this can contribute to have an overall goal. This could be type of initiative that could be inspiring for other sectors. And yeah, to conclude, because we don't have much time, I was also, as a researcher at FSR, very pleased to see that part of our work was also taken into consideration in the report of the Scientific Advisory Board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Albert. Thanks a lot. I will now pass immediately on to Sven. And Sven, what's your take about the report and where we are in achieving climate neutrality? I know it's difficult to condense everything in 5 minutes, but please try.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll do my best. And first, thanks for the invitation. And I think the fact that we have this report and also the other work that the ESABCC has been doing shows how important it is to have such a scientific reference body also on European level. And I think it has really helped over the last 1.5 years to step up the work and step up the ambition. Of course, we as Can Europe also making use of the analyses, but also in dialogues with the ESABCC and contributing to other consultations. We have been involved, I think, in the detailed policy work in most of the files under the Fit for 55 and even some others. So yeah, really have been in the middle of many things. I think in terms of the recommendations, let me start off maybe with the main challenge we have, and that's not a fault in any case of the ESABCC, but the ambition level for 2030, in our view, is insufficient. We've been for many years asking for at least 65% emission reductions, because if you look at it from a global perspective and figure out the speed by which we need to reduce emissions, and under a equity and fair shares approach, the 55% is insufficient. And of course, then that has a lot of implications also on the trajectory towards climate neutrality, which we regard as necessary to achieve in 2040 and not 2050. This has implications on the trajectories, downward trajectories of the emission reductions up from now to 2030, but of course, in particular, beyond. So let me just pick out a few specific things. I think the NECPs have been mentioned quite a lot, and that's a very important instrument. And we've been involved in quite some analysis and are still conveying recommendations to the governments, including with our members in the many countries, how to improve them, because I think it's very critical to fill some of the gaps, even leaving aside that the ambition level overall is not sufficient. We see some concerning signals in some countries that they are moving away or not on track, for example, for reducing coal phase out or managing the coal phase out, expanding renewables at the level needed. So there's much more that needs to be done, and government should really step up these plans when they submit them. I think the end of June is a deadline for that. Another element important to mention, in my view, is that we also need to look into 2035 as an important date. Under the international climate regime, the EU will have to submit a nationally determined contribution with a 2035 target. And we think it should not be treated as a side note, but really we need to think through how we accelerate already by then, and not just between 2030 and 2050, or even slow down. The social measures have been mentioned. I think that's very critical, that the next generation of climate policies need to give even more attention to, let's say, addressing some of the social and economic impacts we're seeing, but we also see a massively increased potential socio-economic benefits from even stronger climate ambition. We recently released a report which estimated that if we go for 65% emission reduction by 2030, there could be an additional benefits of 1 trillion euro or maybe even more. And I'm happy to share the link with those reports. Final point I want to make on agriculture, although I have to say we are in the process of forming our position. I think a pricing mechanism on its own might not be sufficient, as long as least as we have a common agricultural policies, which is directing hundreds of billions of euro into at least partially, let's say, not the climate resilient and climate neutral directions we need. And an ETS on agriculture, for example, I don't think would work if we don't tackle the other issues. So agriculture is a very important part in the future, but that's a critical one, but also complex one. And sorry, the really final point on the fossil fuel phase out. What we are missing is clear strategies for coal phase out by 2030, gas phase out 2035, and oil phase out 2040. Of course, this has implications for the different sectors, but we feel it's useful to spell out these areas in more detail, and would also expect that from the future policy making towards the 2040 target. So maybe I'll leave it with that. There are many more things that could be said, but I hand over to you, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Sven. I was expecting you to call for more ambitious targets. The issue is not to set more ambitious targets, it's how we get there, which is what I think also the report that Lena presented clearly highlights. Okay, next is Paul Wilczek from Eurelectric. So the view of the industry, the electricity industry. Paul.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot also for having me here at this FSI event. Really interesting debate and input so far. Let me reflect a little bit on a point that Lena mentioned, and that was not so picked up on, but that is very important for us in the utility industry, in the power sector. Namely, your focus on electrification and how we are doing on electrification rates and its role to electrify in order to cost efficiently decarbonize at the end of the day. So you are pointing out at a very important issue that we have at the moment, namely the stagnating electrification rates that we have in the European Union. So the electrification rates were indeed stagnating, as you showed, Lena, 22%, 23% on average in the European Union. This has not changed, and we don't have any KPI on that. The 2040 target communication outlined a trajectory on electrification rates here, however, that is quite useful. So we are looking at an electrification rate increase to 35% up to 2030 and up to 50 more or less up to 2040. That is also in line with our own analysis in the power sector. So this is something that I think needs to be picked up on also by European policy as a KPI. So if we are aiming at a decarbonization at that pace by 2030 and 2040, what are the effective means to do so? inside the whole energy sector, we are saying the power sector is decarbonizing fully, but of course, over 2/3 of the rest of the energy is going at a much slower pace. So we need to electrify more, so we decarbonize energy more and faster and in a more cost-efficient way. So that is an important KPI that we should keep in mind. We are suggesting an indicator in the NECPs that also includes electrification as a concrete suggestion. So why not asking member states, and the data is available, how they are doing on electrification of transport, electrification of industrial processes and heating, because of all of this is ongoing. In transport, we are electrifying much more because of electric vehicles rollout. In heating, the heat pump rollout is quite a success, despite all the hiccups. But I do see that this will increase quite a lot, and we will electrify at least on a residential level and decarbonize quite well. Hopefully, fingers crossed. But this electrification will stagnate, will go up. A bit more worried about industrial processes. How quick will they be able to decarbonize, and what sort of support will they need? A lot of industrial processes, not to forget, is low heat, so it can be effectively decarbonized and through direct electrification as well. And there are important breakthroughs in the industrial heat pump technologies available as well on that. So just to say, let's keep track on electrification as a measure to accompany decarbonization pathways that we see right now. That's really important to see, how we are doing and how cost efficient this can be after all. Because not to forget, it's not electrification because of the sake of it. It's because this will bring down primary and final energy use after all. So this is about energy efficiency at the end of the day. So I also want to outline a bit what's in the communication and a couple of points that we are a bit surprised about. So not surprisingly, the power sector is of course supposed to be fully decarbonized. This is more or less in line with our own projections. We have 2042 in fact as a target year, according to our own study, Decarbonization Speedways, as a target date. However, we were quite surprised to see that by 2040 the power sector is surprised to be net positive, actually, even. And that you are assuming, if I read this correctly, in the over 2,000 pages at least of the, if you include the impact assessment, but I tried. So if I read this correctly, you're assuming 62% of all the carbon capture and storage also to be applicable in the power sector. I would have expected much more actually in industrial processes, that are hard to abate, cement, etc., you name it, to have much more carbon capture and storage applied there too. So a bit surprised to see that you assume so much carbon capture and storage in power generation. And that is one feature. Also to say, we have nothing against a high ambition on us, but, we want to be decarbonized. It's just a question of, a few years discrepancy, if at all. But still, the claim to be really net positive is a bit surprising when you look at the overall sector and the balance of decarbonization efforts there. So the Scientific Advisory Board has said that the agricultural sector could cut emissions by up to 60%, but now it's about 13%, if I read this correctly. So happy to help, but we are compensating a lot, as it seems now, across the sectors for lower ambitions elsewhere. So fully understand the political implications that we are seeing, but this needs to be, of course, something that is realistic, something that is cost efficient, and happy to debate the costs of CCS in power generation and what this means in terms of euros per kilowatt hour. That's basically my take, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yes, indeed. And now we have, now we will have discussion. There are already a number of questions, and I will give all of you another chance after the polls, both to comment on the poll results and also to address some of the issues that have come up from the audience. So I now pass the screen to Ilaria to run the polls.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Alberto. And yes, many thanks for the interesting insights already from our panelists. I'm asking my colleague Tomiris, who is working for us behind the scenes, yes, that we are ready for the first poll. So these polls are really for the whole audience. Panelists cannot vote, but everyone attending this debate can. So the very first question is, in your view, which ones of the following cross-cutting issues highlighted in the report to making the transition to carbon neutrality a reality by 2050 have still to be properly tackled by the EU? And you can select up to 3 answers. So this is a multiple choice. Please vote. See? Okay, well, apart from climate governance, which doesn't seem to be one of the favorite ones, to say the least, we see a quite varied vote. So pricing greenhouse gases emissions and rewarding removals, the need for a whole of society approach, finance and investments, labor skills and capacity building and innovation. So each of them, the winner seems to be the need for a whole of society approach, but the vote is very diversified. Next question. So now, as you know, we are going to have soon a new European Commission. So this question is about the priority number 1. So since the report came up with several recommendations to ensure that the 55% GHG reduction objective for the 2030 is reached or exceeded. So what should be really priority number 1 for the next Commission? Implementing Fit for 55, conclude the pending legislative initiatives of the European Green Deal, particularly the taxation directive, provide a stable investment outlook for renewables, or phase out fossil fuel subsidies. One answer is possible here. Priority number 1. Again, poor Commission, I would say. So fully and swiftly implement the Fit for 55 package, the European taxation directive, and phasing out subsidies to the fossil fuel industry seem to be more or less on the same level. Less important, providing a stable investment outlook for renewables, according to our votes. Okay, now we are having 2 questions. It's basically, we are going to ask you to identify out of the 6 levers listed below here to reduce the emissions from the energy supply. We will ask you first what is the most important as a policy priority, and in the next question we will ask you what is the least important, and the list is going to be the same. So the 6 levers are the same. So the 6 levers are improving energy efficiency, phase out fossil fuels, speed up the rollout of renewable energy, enhance energy system integration, better target carbon capture, utilization and storage, CCUS, or reduce methane emissions. So the most important as a policy priority. This is more in general compared to the previous one. Previous one was really focusing on the 55% reduction. This is more in general. So the winner is phasing out fossil fuels, a bit unsurprisingly. And then also, again, there is a big variety of preferences for the other 6 levers. So the preferred one, phasing out fossil fuels. Let's see what's instead the least important. Second question. Least important policy priority out of the same list. CCUS, apparently not so much of a policy priority, or at least, no, sorry. Yes, it's correct. So CCUS is the least important as a policy priority according to our audience. Okay, I think we have a last one. Yes. So we understood also from the report presented by Lina that it's important for European policies to be better aligned. And the report mentions energy infrastructure and markets policy, so the 10E, finance, the European taxonomy, and also the policies regarding industrial emissions, so the Industrial Emissions Directive and competition, for example, state aid rules. But we can also could mention more. Do you agree with this statement of the Sustainable Advisory Board for Climate Change? So I fully agree, I rather disagree, I fully disagree, or I don't know, I prefer not to say. Fully agree or rather agree. Wow, this is a very strong response. I would say full endorsement to this finding and this statement of the report. So well done. There's just a couple of people who are not sure nor undecided or want to remain anonymous, but everybody else seems to fully endorse this statement. So thank you very much for participating in the audience, and the floor goes back to Alberto now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ilaria, and thank you to the audience for participating and also for putting some questions. We have now slightly over 15 minutes, so I would like to go back to our panelists and to our presenters, maybe in reverse order. So Paul will go first, then Sven, Albert, then Stefano, and then Lena to finish. And I would like to ask you not only to comment on the result of the polls, but also maybe address 2 or 3 issues that have been put in the question and answer facility. The first one is on the role of nuclear energy in the future towards 2030 and probably beyond. The second one is about the threat of investor-state dispute settlement from fossil fuel investors, and how do we think that this might might impede the path toward carbon neutrality. And then finally the Commission seems to be hinting to other technologies, including CCS, hydrogen, and small modular reactors, to be crucial for 2040. But at the moment, at least CCS and hydrogen seems to be still a bit uncertain, the role that they could have. So as I said, we have slightly over 15 minutes, so I would really ask you to stay within 3 minutes each. So I think, Paul, why don't you start?
Thank you. Yeah, so on the first question on nuclear, I think the 2040 target communication outlines a range of between 10 and 11% in the power generation mix, if I read this correctly. Our own estimations are slightly higher than that. But of course, it doesn't change the fact that the future power mix with regards to decarbonized technologies will be dominated by variable renewables generation, namely wind and solar PV. So these are the clear dominating 2 technologies. That's also what our scenarios give us. Nuclear will play an important part, however, at least on a regional scale. That's of course also clear. So here we see the target communication slightly on the lower side. That links a bit with the question number 3, frameworks for post 2030. What is crucial here is continuity and regulatory stability, I believe, as well as an approach that's sort of technology neutral, because it's clear that we don't only need variable renewables, although they will be the clear dominating technologies. We need to keep supporting them. It's clear. However, we need also firm capacities to ensure system adequacy. That doesn't only include, of course, the important features of storage and flexibility, but also think about biomass. Hydropower is an important feature in the renewables family that provides not only flexible generation, but also dispatchable generation. So that's super important, as well as let's see, for other technologies such as geothermal, SMRs, how big a role they can play. But we really need to have an open mindset to bring all of them online after 2030, of course, then most realistically, right? CCS and hydrogen for us are still the question marks, of course. What role will they play and at what cost? Yeah, that is but I cannot really cover this probably in 3 minutes here. So maybe I stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. Then Sven, what's your take of the outcome of the polls and also the issues which I mentioned?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I mean, it was interesting to see how consistent some of the answers in the polls are, right? If a priority is to get rid of fossil fuels in the energy sector, then it's also logical that you don't need a lot of focus on CCS in the energy sector, because you would mostly work without fossil fuels and without emissions. So I think that's important to see. Another aspect which is somehow linked, but which we also want to highlight, which he has adopted as a new position, as the importance of, I think, a separate target in the long run, that we don't end up in a system which mixes up actual emission reductions with industrial removals and also with land-based or other types of removals. That hasn't really come up in the discussion, but I think it's the next generation of the targets which we got as important. On this question about the investors, fossil fuel investors suing the government and so on, I mean, the EU is clearly on its way out of the Energy Charter Treaty, and I think that sends a clear political signal. And we have also, let's say, more and more litigation cases, basically, and also findings from courts, which make a clear case for moving out of fossil fuels and for enhancing our climate action. So I think the possibilities for that will be less and less. And then maybe final point on the nuclear, we are currently in the process of adopting an updated position on nuclear, I think, and this also relates to the investment stability for renewables. We see the need for a 100% renewable energy system by 2040, and have concerns that a debate about, nuclear resurgence and so on is really at risk of diverting critically needed investments and also public resources. And we don't see that these technologies can really deliver in the next 5 to 10 years anything meaningful for our emission reduction. And already now you're seeing like bundling renewables and nuclear in a low carbon debate, how there are attempts basically to shift away or to undermine security for renewables by bringing these things together. So that's maybe just a few points to add to the discussion and to some of the findings from the polls. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you much. Thank you very much, Sven. I think this is probably a topic for another debate, because it's quite an interesting one, and how the various sources will fit together in the future. Albert, being part of the house, I would ask you to be even briefer than
sure.
the others.
I also feel quite aligned, of course, with the results of the poll. My surprise a bit was that there was not much emphasis on the need of finance and investment, which for me are something quite crucial. Same goes with the climate, with the governance. How do we make that work? What's the role of how do we keep track on the progress? What's the role of the different levels? This is something that needs to be really fluid and to make the whole symphony work. In terms of priority, having read a bit the report on energy, I understand that first is energy efficiency, and that's the most crucial. Renewables go second, and with the new technologies, the report focuses a lot on CCS and hydrogen, but I guess this nuclear would be another aspect. This really should, I would say, focus on really where the need arose and where in the sectors that are hard to abate or no other solutions are. I keep it short like that.
Thank you very much, Albert. Excellent, perfect. Now I see that Alban has also joined. So Alban and Stefano, maybe you can have 4 minutes, because Alban didn't have an opportunity beforehand. So
yes,
please, your take.
I will leave to Alban to reply to the more technical question on the energy mix. Just let me to add small things. I think there was an item that slipped out of the questions and the debate is the international side. So as a priority, we have the 3I we always refer to: implementation, innovation, and international. I think this item will be very important next years, and the Commission is working hardly to convince other partners to follow the EU in their policy. But I leave to Alban to reply to the question on mix.
Okay. Thanks, Stefano, and good afternoon, colleagues. A few points from my side. On the general, points raised by the panelists. Well, first, as has been mentioned already by Stefano, but also by Elena, I mean, all our effort is to deliver the 2030 target and be at least 55% target. That's really what we are putting our effort on together with member states. I think the ESABCC report is very interesting in that regard. There's still work to be done. The pieces of legislation are there, but now we need to get that implemented, and it's we'll do what it takes to get there, but it won't be a walk in the park as we say. And then on looking beyond 2030, it's true that the analysis underpinning the communication. So first of all, it's an analysis illustrating different pathways to get to the recommended 2040 targets. There are no sectoral targets objectives there. Just to make it clear, it's true that it shows that the power system is to decarbonize first, say, by 2040. I think it's close to net zero by 2040. It goes together throughout the energy system with a clear transition away from fossil fuels. I mean, it shows a reduction of about 80% of fossil fuel use for energy purposes. So that's very significant compared to today. But of course, all sectors will need to contribute, beyond the energy system and beyond the power system. I think it's the analysis also makes it clear that other gases, all the other sectors will need to contribute and to reduce GHG emissions. By and large, I mean, there is no silver bullet policy solution to get there, but the same as for the Fit for 55. So it will be a full portfolio of policies, energy policies, transport and climate policies, and then more enabling framework focused or related policies on investments, on social aspects, on the international dimension that Stefano mentioned, which is indeed critical here. So it's a few elements on nuclear versus renewables and on technology neutrality in general. So the Commission is indeed, aims at having a technology neutral approach. The analysis of the 2040 makes clear that renewables will be, the core of the investment and of the future energy system. But of course, all technologies will need to be mobilized to get to the recommended 90% target. I think the analysis also is quite clear on that. Specifically on nuclear, some member states have, expressed their interest to keep nuclear in their energy mix, in the coming years and decades, and that's something that we need to take into account. There were different elements. I mean, some points on CCUS, hydrogen. They are also identified as, a bit novel technologies, but we also think that they are important. They will have to play a role. The analysis shows clearly that to decarbonize industrial processes, that will be very difficult to do without carbon capture. It also shows that industrial removals, we need to play some role. And again, you need their carbon capture, even though from different sources, to compensate for how to abate remaining emissions in the system, including from agriculture, but potentially also for other sectors. On the specific point on the fossil fuel investors dispute, we don't have I don't have here a position here for the Commission on that specific point, but our analysis is clear, and I think our general overall policy message is that we'll move away from fossil fuels is a clear goal and direction that we will follow in the coming years. Okay, very much agree that we need regulatory stability. I think it was a point mentioned by our Euretric colleague. And of course, I also agree with Albert that financing, which may sound a bit like a kind of dull topic, is actually crucial to get there. I mean, to get things actually deployed on the ground, we need financing, and that's something that we keep a very close eye on, and we'll keep doing so in the coming months and years. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alban. Thank you very much, Stefano. Yes, it's not a walk in the park, or at least it's a very steep and long park. So the last 3 minutes are for Lena. Your take, Lena, before we close.
Thank you very much. I found it super interesting to hear everybody's views and also the results from the polls, and I'm happy that there is a general agreement, at least with some of our statements. Regarding the priorities, I found it quite interesting to see. I think reality is that we will need to prioritize all of them, right? The ones that we mentioned in the report, so that we can actually manage to be on the pathway towards carbon neutrality. And I really also appreciate the work, all the work that's been done in the EU and also in the Commission, to even get to where we are at the moment and to have all these targets. And, there's a lot to be done also on the implementation. And that also leads me to one of the comments that a couple of the comments that I'd like to reply on. And that is obviously the 2030 target. And I think, it was mentioned that 65 would be better by Cannes Europe. And if you remember, our 2040 report is also, we would also prefer a more ambitious target. What we write in our report is that the 55% reduction is something we can work with in most of the pathways. And we also appreciate that there is political reality around that. And of course, even the 55 is requiring accelerated emission reductions in all areas, really, that what we can see from the report. But it also entails that we have to be even more ambitious on the 2040 target and the pathway afterwards, and that is clear. And also entails that the EU has more difficulties in actually living up to their global commitments in terms also of fairness, which we also mentioned a lot. Then, of course, I just want to mention there was a question regarding renewables post 2030, and we make this statement that stable investment environment, stable legal frameworks, that of course goes across the board, not only renewables. It needs to be implemented fast now, but it also needs to be in place or stay in place in the post-2030 environment. So just because it needs to be implemented now doesn't mean that it needs to stay, or it should also stay in the post-2030 environment. I can say a lot more about the other technologies, but I will stop. The only thing I want to say is that we know that most of the change, especially in the energy sector, needs to happen right now in the early years, right? In the next 10, 15 years. And I completely agree with what has been said before. So there is an urgency in terms of that transition that we should not neglect. And we need to have options implemented that are able to deliver fast. In order to stay on these pathways.
Thank you very much, Lena. Thank you also for presenting the report. Ilaria.
Yes, some final conclusion very quickly. So first of all, a big thank you to all the speakers for their very interesting insights. I take with me the sense of urgency, which was really importantly underlined in the report, but also the fact that it was important to take stock of where we are, of the progress achieved in recent years, also thanks to good policies implemented at European level. There's a lot to do still, of course, and I fully agree. I think that here the conclusions are more for Lina to bring back home and in general to the discussions within the board. So from our side, a big thank you, particularly to Alberto, my co-host. I want to thank also a lot Albert, because it was really good to cooperate with the colleagues in the FSR Climate. He also made my job of organizing the debate much easier and smoother, so thank you very much. And our colleague Tomiri Samirova, who has been responsible for the technical part and the organization of the event, so thank you very much. I think we have one final slide, because if you have been interested in the debate today, you may be also interested in one of the training courses that we offer, and it is on the European Green Deal. So the topics we discussed today are in this course analyzed in greater details, and we really all participate as instructors in this big course, which is our flagship course. So thank you very much for your attention, and yes, I wish you a nice continuation of the evening, and we'll meet again for another policy debate soon. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.